Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing? I hope you've had an amazing experience at this incredible conference. It's an absolute privilege to be here for a second year in a row. Wow, how about that? And a great audience to come and speak to, and a great opportunity to talk about some of the work that we're doing down under in this area. So I'm Toby Feakin, and as you've just been told, and I'm Australia's ambassador for cyber affairs. So, I mean, what do many of you think about if you were thinking about what an ambassador might be? You probably think about cars with flags ruffling in the wind and, embassy parties with endless flowing champagne and canapes and maybe tabletops full of chocolates and Ferrero Rocher. So I do some of that sometimes. But also I'm a builder, and I like building things. And most of my time is actually spent in this job of building things and working exclusively on an exciting renovation. So let's get a bit of audience participation. I want to see a few hands here. How many of you have tried renovating a house? Go on, don't be shy. There you go, look at, now I can get an idea. That's quite a few people who've tried. It's pretty hard work, isn't it? I bet most of you have sweat, blood, sweat, and tears over trying to renovate a house. It's pretty hard. But in the end, once you get your final product, it's worth it, isn't it? Because you get that amazing new renovated feel of something you've produced yourself. So I'm working on a long-term project of renovation here, of essentially a very old, an ancient monument, maybe akin to what you can see there on the slide. And it's being built for many, many generations. And the house is the international rules-based order, which you probably hear a lot about in your newspapers, from your politicians. And it's really gradually being built over many, many years of testing and evaluation and failure at times over decades. It's been built by monarchs, by presidents, by ambassadors, and other diplomats as well. And today, though, however, we meet at a critical juncture. Also an exhilarating juncture in human history, but the house is being renovated in order that we can meet the challenge that the digital age presents us all. And as governments, we really are incredibly aware now. It might not have been the case 10, 15 years ago, but we're so aware that there is a risk that probably all of you in this room have known about for a long, long time, that unrestrained and irresponsible behavior in cyberspace has the ability to really cause considerable damage to society. And old institutions sometimes need a bit of time to catch up. And many of our current policies, essentially, are the legacy of the analog era. And they need to be reinterpreted for this digital era that we now find ourselves in. So if you like, the gap between technology 4.0 and policy 1.0 really needs to be bridged, and more rapidly than any other policy area that we're dealing with currently. So digital connectivity is the engine that we know is driving our modern societies, our economic growth. But the benefits that we're now enjoying come with risks, and you'll hear that all the time, won't you? I'm sure you've heard so many presentations that tell you that, but it's worth reinforcing. And the difficulty we see now is that cybersecurity incidences that are global in scale, there've been the possibility for an awful long time, and again, many of you professionals in this room will have known that for an awful long time, but now we're seeing that come of age and actually being enabled and actioned in the global environment. So now we think it's a vital period in time in order that we act and ensure that the benefit that we all want to endure in the digital space and for digital connectivity is protected, and that essentially we protect also in the same token global security and stability. So Australia, what we're doing is we're upgrading our diplomacy. That's my responsibility in order that it's fit for the digital age. So I've got the honor of being the ambassador for cyber affairs. It's the first of its kind in Australia. It's the first time we've done it, and it's a recognition of the fact of how important this area of diplomacy is now to Australia's interests in the global area. But there's scarcely an international issue that you will see which doesn't have some kind of cyber component in its background. And really, many of the people in the world that I work in, that world of multilateral diplomacy, the digital world hasn't quite made its mark, if you like, into the workplace. So diplomacy is quite a strange and arcane language and symbols, and I'll share some of that with you because you might not even have been made aware of that in the past. So ambassadors are appointed by letters of credence, and they're sealed copies which are sent to kings and queens and presidents, prime ministers, in order that those credentials are delivered. And in some countries, ambassadors present their credentials to a head of state in a horse-drawn carriage. There's me in a horse-drawn carriage. It's pretty nifty computer work, that, isn't it, to get me into that carriage. Certainly isn't me in that carriage. But essentially, that is an ambassador's carriage of a particular country, no named, and your seniority is judged on the number of horses that you have at the front of that carriage. There's 4 there. I would probably require 10. No ego here at all. We still call our official language cables because they were based on the telegrams that we know and enjoy from the past. We transact business in notes verbale with language that wouldn't be out of place in a Jane Austen novel. And we also démarche people when we're pretty upset with them. So you can see there's quite a challenge in front of us, not least of all me trying to get my carriage with at least 10 horses on the front. But in the past year, more seriously, what we now know is that there is an increasing catalogue of these instances which have global impacts and affect us all. NotPetya and WannaCry are 2 examples of this in the last year. And we know that there's been this long-held potential, but as I say, it's now being recognized. And there are, of course, many instances that will never make the public profile of these 2 instances, and you'll see those in your jobs every day. But NotPetya caused billions of dollars worth of damage. And we even know that, worryingly, it impacted the radiation monitors at Chernobyl. WannaCry hits hundreds of thousands of computers worldwide, 150 different countries impacted, including the National Health Service in the UK. That's significant critical infrastructure impacts that we're seeing. And what we're concerned about now is the significance of these instances shouldn't be underestimated, and that states and their proxies are viewing cyberspace as a domain to exert influence, power, and we're witnessing that increasingly more frequently now in the modern era than we ever did in the past. And it's being used to undermine the security of other countries. And malicious and irresponsible cyber activity is increasingly part of a pattern of reckless and deliberate conduct by states and their proxies. We think that's a growing threat to the international security and international stability that we know and enjoy. And the growth in scale, scope, and severity of cyber instances demands more than just that technical response. The safety and security of cyberspace, we think, has a direct bearing on the relationships between states. We're seeing that play out in your newspapers. I guarantee every day you'll pick up a newspaper and see some kind of cyber incident that impacts upon the way that states talk to one another and interact. And in that increasingly globalized world, the ability of all of us to go about our daily lives is being impacted. But we have the good foundations for the renovation of this house that we're all renovating together here. But we don't need to bulldoze that house and start over again. We think that there are existing groundwork to build on in this area. And the international rules-based order, it supported the kind of economic prosperity that we all enjoy in this room. And we're keen to ensure that that continues. So we're working on implementing what we call an international cyber stability framework, which will renovate that international rules-based order to meet the challenge of the digital age. And our renovation has 5 key pillars, which you'll see on the slide there. We think that the application of international law to cyberspace is vital. 2, developing and implementing norms of behavior for states is important as well. 3, deterring and responding to malicious instances is incredibly important too. And 4, implementing confidence-building measures is of vital importance. And 5, building capacity to manage cyber threats wherever you are in the world is increasingly important. And all of these things need to be carried out on a global scale. So now I'm going to break some of that down for you. So international law, let's look at that first. It's a major pillar of what we do as states. Cyberspace is not an ungoverned space as far as states are concerned. The domain is new, but the rules aren't. The international community, including the powers that you would envisage being in agreement on these issues, US, UK, China, Russia, we've all agreed, and Australia included, that the fundamental starting point is that international law applies in cyberspace as much as it does in the physical space. And that means that countries need to act in accordance with that law and with the same legal obligations that they would think about in the physical environment too. So rather than trying to tie ourselves up in knots, reinventing the wheel and renegotiating new treaties, which will take decades and decades and decades, we think we have that groundwork to build on, and we just need to further our understanding of how international law applies. So we're making good progress on that front, and we're working well. Secondly, going to talk about norms. So we've squared away a bit about international law. As we've seen, it moves slowly, but you can complement the fact that everything in cyberspace moves so fast by implementing norms, which are a bit more flexible, and we can perhaps do a little bit more about them. Well, what are norms? I don't know. In society, we have certain behavioral norms, I guess. So when you meet and greet somebody, you might shake hands with them. That's a social norm. You might kiss the cheek of someone that you meet. Again, they're societal norms, behaviors that develop to ensure that we all work together harmoniously and have a bit of respect for each other in what we're doing. So good progress has been made in this area. 2015, we squared away that 11 norms of state behavior are agreed to through a UN grouping. We've put that as Australia into policy. And what are some of the things that are included in that? Firstly, countries refrain from using cyber tools to damage critical infrastructure. Secondly, countries should take appropriate measures to protect their own critical infrastructure from cyber threats. And thirdly, essentially countries have a responsibility to investigate malicious activity that's emanating from within their own borders. So it all sounds like basic stuff. And you might say that you've seen some break some of those norms already in the international arena. And that's where we think the next part of this building work takes place, which is deterrence. And it's quite a tough topic to talk about, to be frank, but there's no point in having those rules unless there are consequences for those who are beginning to break them. And that's what we're seeing in the international scene. So we're working with international partners to try and ensure that they're being followed. And this is our third pillar. At its simplest, what is deterrence? It's essentially making someone else think twice before they conduct an activity. Think about their risk calculus. You know, those risks are far more dangerous than the benefits that you'll gain from using a particular piece of malware. And we've long practiced denial, if you like, through deterrence by denial, in terms of creating strong cyber defenses, and we're working now as a community to ensure that groups of states increase the cost of that inappropriate behavior. We can't do this alone, it has to be through coordinated efforts. And I think, you know, as I suggested, there are states who think they're immune to some of these issues through issues like NotPetya, through WannaCry, that these rules don't apply to them, but they do. And we need to change that. And such responses that we eventually take don't have to be through cyber means, probably will rarely be through cyber means, but they could involve all the different levers that you have at your disposal: diplomatic measures, legal measures, policing actions, economic, or even in worst case scenarios, military measures. It totally depends on the incident. But they should also include new and novel ways of responding and combining different levers of government and also broader private sector that you might have. And we need to understand, as so much of this capability exists in the private sector, how do we work on these kinds of deterrence issues with you? Now, some of you are probably thinking, you know, this all started off very nice. There's an ambassador on stage who's a diplomat. Now, none of this sounds very diplomatic. Sounds like he's quite an aggressive bloke. And you're probably, you know, wondering, how can we do this if you don't know who did it? Well, look, our objective overall is to have stability in cyberspace. We don't want an ungoverned environment where nobody stands to benefit and we're worried about who's around the next corner. But what we're understanding now increasingly is that attribution isn't quite as hard and isn't impossible as many used to say. We're getting better at that. And I can assure you, Australia is getting much, much better at this. And we can assure you also that our responses, as and when they take place, will be proportionate and consistent with domestic and international law. We are responsible state actors, and what we are saying is we're calling on all countries to be responsible in the activities that they take. Confidence building measures. So this renovation is getting a little bit serious now. It's important to reinforce the pillars that we're rebuilding this house in. So the fourth pillar is confidence building measures that we want to build this on, and they foster trust between countries to prevent misunderstandings that could potentially lead to conflict. And so when we respond to these malicious actors, states are confident that we're doing so with solid justification and within the boundaries of international law. One of the well-known confidence-building measures is the red phone, which exists between the Kremlin and the White House. So they can pick up the phone, have direct access, and if anything goes wrong, they know they can actually have a clearer understanding of what might be there. So what are some of these ways you do confidence-building measures? Transparency, dialogue, bringing in broader stakeholders as well into that conversation, and the sharing of views on different issues, just getting a clearer understanding of where you stand. Risk reduction measures. Australia and Malaysia, for example, we're leading a piece of work in trying to make sure that we have workable points of contact across this region. So we know exactly who to call. If something goes wrong, we know when and where to call someone, and that person can action what we're asking them to action. So, for example, if an attack on Australia appeared to be originating from New Zealand, we would know exactly who to call and discuss the issue with. And we also have a whole cooperative program in Australia's cooperation program. And this brings me on to the final pillar, which is capacity building. And this is where we assist in building other sectors and other countries in having the ability to join this international cyber stability framework. And the private sector have a huge job in assisting and working in this area too. We all stand to benefit from better cybersecurity in the region, don't we? And globally. So we set out the rules of the road with international law and norms, carried and said that we'll call out those countries that don't actually comply with those rules and norms that we put in place. We've built trust between states. We need to ensure that all countries are able to protect themselves. So what is Australia doing in this regard? We're investing $30 million over 4 years in assisting countries in building their capacities and capabilities in order that they can also be part of this international cyber stability framework. And one of the key areas we work on is focusing on cybercrime, and we're enhancing countries' abilities to respond and investigate instances through working with their legislative measures, with their judiciaries, with their cybercrime experts, in order that they can really raise themselves up to the task. And another priority is cyber incident response measures. We're working hard and investing in the region to ensure that there's a better joint capability in that area. And in the Pacific, we're working hard on an organization called Paxon, which is a network of cybersecurity response professionals, in trying to share best practice and make sure that they are raising the bar together with a sustainable capability. And the region will be stronger if we have stronger and more capable nations in cybersecurity as a whole. So as we reach the end, what are my key conclusions, apart from the fact that I don't have a carriage with 10 horses, which I do have to go home and get something done about it? So my life isn't all parties either. I kind of wish it was, but it's not the case. Don't think for a second I sit there in lots of parties at embassy receptions. I don't actually do that a lot at all. I'm more often than not on planes, carrying out the diplomacy, trying to ensure that all of these issues are dealt with by different countries and our partners. And this renovation, it's complex. It's slow burn at times. It's multifaceted. And we're trying to adapt that international rules-based order in order that it really does meet the challenge of the digital age in which we're in. And despite the criticisms that you see quite regularly at the international rules-based order, we think it's been that cornerstone of economic growth and prosperity, again, that we all enjoy in this room. And if we reinforce those 5 pillars of the international cyber stability framework, it will ensure that in cyberspace we have a prosperous future in cyberspace and not so much of a dangerous one. And actions in cyberspace that threaten international peace and stability really should not be tolerated. And we, as a country and as groups of countries, should be upholding the international rules-based order online, just as we do offline. And if you like, we're renovating here. We're not demolishing, and we don't need to demolish the international rules-based order, for God's sake. We need to understand renovations are difficult. You need to retain the character of the building, but you need to modernize it to make sure that it's ready for everything that's set to come. So all of us in this room have a responsibility and an interest in ensuring that that happens. And as renovations are made, I think many hands make light work. So I'm enjoying being here, but also enjoying inviting you all to be part of this journey and make sure that we take the international rules-based order into the 21st century and make it right for the digital age. Thank you.